So in today's video, I want to show you how you can improve your posture, more specifically your neck, back and shoulder posture, so that you can help all of those areas function better and decrease the risk that they are contributing to your aches and pains. And while posture isn't necessarily the most sexy topic of conversation, it does form the foundation of how our tissue likes to be moved and used. And any situations throughout your day where you might be drawn out or unknowingly pulled away from a really nice posture leaves the door ajar for something to accumulate over time. And while these shapes and positions aren't necessarily predictive of aches, pains or injuries to your neck, back or shoulders, clinically we can look back to the things that you do most often and we can very quickly start to understand why your tissue may become sore in the first place. Now, one of the challenges that a lot of people face when they're trying to improve their posture day to day is that it sometimes feels awkward and uncomfortable to get back into a really good shape. And what I tend to find as a physio is that the reason why it can often feel uncomfortable to be here, apart from not being there enough leading up to that point, is that when we tend to lose a good posture and either our neck and our chin pokes forwards, our upper back rounds, our shoulders round, everything sort of drops and rolls forwards, the load that these positions create on specific parts of our body can ask those areas to become stiff, tight and restricted, so that when you try and get back through those stiffnesses and tightnesses into a better posture, it all of a sudden feels harder than it needs to be. So the first thing I want to go through in this video is I want to show you how you can mobilize some of the commonly stiff and restricted tissues from being out of a good posture, that by taking away those handbrakes may then make it feel easier for you to get back into a good position. And what the first exercise is going to look to do is that if you have a ball or a tennis ball of some sort, we're going to look through some of the stiffnesses and tightnesses that get accrued through the middle to upper sections of your upper back, that thoracic spine, those facet joints, those costovertebral joints, which are the rib joints that attach into the spine. Often when we're in this sort of rounded neck looking down sort of shape, the load from those positions often travels through the musculature of the shoulders and attaches into the base of the neck and the upper back. And as those positions continue to be common, it's very easy for there to be extra tension through those shapes, which asks a lot of the tissue of your upper back and shoulder blades to become stiff, tight and restricted. And then when you're trying to get back through this into a better position, it can often make you feel uncomfortable and make it hard to sustain this shape when you're always trying to be held back against a resistance or a restriction underneath. So as we like to do on the channel a lot, we can take a ball, you can take a roller, doesn't matter what you use. We want to start basically sort of arbitrarily sort of in the middle of your shoulder blades, just off to one side. Again, we want to get you to lie down on top of the ball, and depending on how this feels for you, we can get you to hunt around for anything that feels stiff, tight and restricted. If one side feels stiffer than the other, then spend more time on that particular side to take away any of those physical handbrakes that might be stopping you from feeling comfortable, pulling yourself back into a better shoulder posture. Now, we've got a few options here as always. We can get you to find a spot, we can get you to stay here. This is a very low level position. If it is quite tender here, start at this particular position. The other thing that we can do here is that we can get you to bridge up and lift your bottom up off the ground to put a little bit more pressure through here. We can take a deep breath into the ball. We can get tight. We can squeeze everything underneath the ball, make that tissue work. The idea being is that when we stop tensing, the tissue will give and we can go a little bit deeper in with the ball. We can also get your bottom back down on the ground and have your arm and lift your arm up above your head. The idea being that we're using shoulder motion to shear free some of the tissue that's restricted. You might find that if you feel there's a particularly stiff spot, you may only get to say here, which is where I feel like you can get to right at the moment. But if we can oscillate in and out of that range very quickly, as that tissue starts to shear free, you should feel like your arm starts to go further and further, and then it's just up to you to make sure that you maneuver the ball around, go looking for the spots that also feel restricted, and get that tissue to mobilize free with some active range of motion. And then again, what you should find is, if we can retry the postures that you were using before, we can get you started in a rounded shape and then try and pull yourself back a little bit more comfortably. And what you should find is it suddenly becomes a little lighter and a little easier to pull those shoulders back into a better position. Because what we've done is we've taken away some of the restrictions, some of the handbrakes or the blocks that are stopping those shoulder blades from sliding back across your upper back into a more natural and anatomically correct position. So once you've spent some time clearing away through some of those restrictions in your upper back, to make it easier for your thoracic spine to extend and your shoulder blades to roll backwards, we also want to make sure that we start to take some of the handbrakes that you may have accumulated at the front through your chest musculature that may also be making it harder for your shoulders to pull back and open up the front of that chest. And a really simple way to stretch out that tissue at the front is that if you can find a door frame or a wall or something in that space, you can have your elbow at about 90 degrees. Have your forearm against the surface. And what we want to do is we want to gently twist your trunk away, looking for some tightness through the front of that chest. Now, depending on how your shoulder feels as you do this, you might need to be down a little bit lower or have your arm up a little bit higher, just to change the angle that your shoulder is in, to bias the tissue that you need to bias to find the best version of this stretch possible. But again, as we talk about a lot on the channel, if you found the best version of your stretch, whatever that might be, it's not good enough for you to just hang out in this position for 15 to 30 seconds and hope that the tissue gives. We need to actively tense the tissue that feels tight in order to get our brain involved, squeeze it for 5 to 10 seconds, make that tissue work, either by pushing back against the stretch, trying to tense up this tissue, or just physically trying to squeeze and tense up your chest muscle in any way that feels comfortable. Again, once you've stopped doing that, well, you should then feel like you can go instantly further than what you could before. And then again, we want to make sure that you tense that muscle again, make it work for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, when you relax, it should give, and then you should be able to take up more slack than you could previously, ultimately making that tissue instantly looser straight away. And then what you should hopefully find again is when you're trying to get back from your habitual postures back into a better shape, it should now feel easier and lighter and less restricted for you to get those shoulders back into a better position. It should also start to feel less taxing to be in this position, because we've taken away some of the roadblocks that the shoulder blade has to pass through to get back there, and some of the handbrakes that it's trying to pull against to also get back there. So once you've started to clear a path for those shoulders to come back a little bit better, we then want to try and make it easy for you to be in that shape over time. So we want to start to build some strength and some endurance for you to be back in this specific position. And a very simple and effective way to do that is with some banded rowing exercises. Now, obviously you can use anything that you have at your disposal. You can do any specific version of this exercise that you feel is meaningful to you and easy for you to do. But the goal is that with this band, you end up pulling your elbows level with your trunk and squeezing those shoulders back as best as you feel comfortable. You can hang out here for 10 to 15 seconds if you want to, but if you have enough resistance, we want to make sure that you can fatigue the muscles in your shoulder blades, the ones that are trying to pull your shoulder back, to give them enough endurance and enough capacity to make sure that when you're trying to be back in this position more often, it has the endurance to tolerate that shape over time. Now, one of the important things that I see a lot of people do wrong with this exercise is we value how close our hands get to our stomach or our chest, as opposed to where our shoulder blades are actually going. Because if you can get your hands to your chest, but your shoulders often dip forwards as a result, then we're not optimizing that shoulders back position as much as we can. Now, if you have enough indigenous range of motion that you can pull your shoulders back and then continue into shoulder extension until your hands get to your trunk, that's perfectly fine. But make sure that you're prioritizing pulling your shoulders back and together first, and then if you need to pull your arms back further, you can. Don't just think of bringing your hands to your trunk, because that may prompt you to dump those shoulders forward and ultimately lose the essence of what we're trying to do with this exercise. But if you can do a couple of sets of 10 or a couple of sets of 15 just to get started, when we're talking about endurance, we do want to push you towards the higher rep ranges, above 15, 20, 25, but we also want a resistance that you feel fatiguing and challenging, because if you don't fatigue those muscles, your brain doesn't get the memo that it wasn't good enough at what you just asked it to do. So if you want those muscles to get stronger as quickly as possible, you need to fatigue them as much as you can to prompt your brain to make changes when you go to sleep overnight. And then the final piece of the puzzle, once you've tried to clear a path for those shoulders and those tissues to be back into a better shape, and you've added some strength to some of the muscles that support you in a better shape, nothing beats trying to foster better habits and better awareness of what a good posture feels like, and trying to capture the moments where you might be dragged out of a good posture by the modern world and distracted from that very fact for as long as you're there. Clinically, one of the biggest challenges of trying to improve someone's day-to-day postural habits is making posture meaningful enough and important enough for you to consistently keep checking in with where you're at any point throughout the day. So the essence of this video isn't necessarily about binging on some exercises to make things better for you instantly. It's about trying to make a meaningful connection with your postures and shapes day to day, where you can arrange the things that you do most throughout the day, whether you're sitting, standing, bending over, walking around, it doesn't matter. We just want to make sure that you're up nice and tall with the shoulders comfortably back and your head facing forwards as best as you feel you can be. And anytime that you can be aware of when you get dragged out of those shapes, whether it be using a computer, whether it be using your phone, reading a book, playing an instrument, driving a car. It doesn't matter what you have to do day to day. It generally matters how you do that activity day to day. It doesn't have to be physically taxing. It can be sedentary and relatively boring, but the shapes that you put your tissue in day to day are the single biggest thing that I find clinically that may set your neck, shoulders, and upper back up for any dysfunction that may be associated with those areas over time. So by freeing up your upper back and your chest muscles and strengthening the muscles around your shoulder blade, it can make being in a better posture for your neck, upper back, and shoulders far easier. But if I can keep using this channel to try and get across the message that those positions and shapes that you get into day to day do matter, even though they may not feel important in the moment, then we can start to take away a lot of the mystery behind why random things tend to happen to us in mostly innocuous ways. And one piece of advice that I find really resonates with a lot of my patients is that if you know what your best posture feels like, you can take this shape, you can put it into your couch at home, behind your desk at work or at home, behind the wheel of your car. You can take it to any of the situations or activities that you find you do the most throughout your week, and you'll have an instant ability to understand how good that shape is for your tissues over time. And if you find that you get into this position and then you go to grab the steering wheel or you relax back into the seat of your car, you can then arrange your environment to try and support that shape better so that when you don't have the capacity to be aware of what you need to do, the environment isn't automatically dragging you away from that, it's supporting you to do that. But ultimately, if you can try and clear up some of the stiffnesses and the tightnesses that might be holding you back from feeling comfortable in a good position, and then add some strength on top of those shapes, it may ultimately become easier and easier for you to get into a better position and sustain that position more effectively over time. But probably more importantly, if you can't be aware of the shapes and the postures that you get into day to day while you're distracted by the things that you need to do day to day, then it may ultimately be impossible for you to resolve this long term, especially if you're dealing with any neck dysfunction, upper back dysfunction, or shoulder dysfunction at the moment. So I genuinely hope that was helpful. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.